Hey guys, welcome back to this channel, The Voice of the Past. In this video, we will unfold the untold story of the Delacroix family's murderous tradition, a deadly celebration. Before continuing, if you are new into this channel, please consider subscribing to this channel. Let's start. The Grand Delacroix estate loomed over the small town of Black Hollow, a relic of an era long past. Its Gothic spires clawed at the moon, casting jagged shadows across the mist-laden grounds. For generations, the Delacroix family had been shrouded in mystery, their wealth matched only by the whispers that followed them. Every year on the first night of winter, they held an exclusive gathering, one that only a select few were ever invited to. Those who attended either returned, changed, or never returned at all. This year, Evelyn Carter received the invitation. A simple envelope, black as night, had appeared on her doorstep. No postmark, no signature, only her name scrawled in elegant silver ink. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers tingling as she slid the wax seal open. You are cordially invited to the annual Delacroix Winter Celebration, midnight, December 1st. Come alone, no exceptions. Your presence is expected. Evelyn frowned. The invitation was both chilling and seductive. She had heard the stories, how the Delacroix family rarely interacted with outsiders, how some guests who attended their gatherings were never seen again. Whispers of disappearances, strange screams carried by the wind, and a legacy of blood-stained wealth followed the Delacroix name. Yet no one dared to accuse them openly. Why now? Why her? Evelyn wasn't from money. She lived in a modest apartment above Hargrove's bookshop, worked late hours at a diner, and spent most of her days dreaming of a life beyond Black Hollow. She wasn't special, not in any way that should have attracted the Delacroix family's attention. And yet, there was the invitation, resting in her trembling hands. Most people would have burned it, shredded it, or buried it deep where it could never tempt them again. But Evelyn wasn't most people. A mixture of curiosity and reckless intrigue propelled her forward. That evening, she did what anyone with common sense wouldn't. She accepted the invitation. The arrival. The road to the Delacroix estate was swallowed by darkness. Fog curled around the ancient trees, swallowing the path ahead. Evelyn drove carefully, her fingers tight on the steering wheel, her heart pounding. The stories about the Delacroix winter celebration varied wildly. Some spoke of masked revelers dancing in eerie silence, of feasts too lavish to be real, of wine that tasted like copper and left guests dazed for days. Others whispered of something more sinister, rituals, sacrifices, a night that ended in blood. The iron gates of the estate stood open as if expecting her. The driveway, lined with towering black oaks, led to the Delacroix Manor, an architectural masterpiece frozen in time. The mansion's stained glass windows flickered with golden light, and music, haunting and melodic, drifted through the night air. A tall, expressionless butler waited at the entrance. He inclined his head as she stepped out of the car, his dark eyes lingering on her for just a moment too long. "This way, Miss Carter," he said smoothly, his voice devoid of warmth. Evelyn hesitated, but before she could turn back, the massive wooden doors creaked open. Inside, the manor was opulent yet suffocating, the grandeur laced with something wrong. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a golden glow, reflecting off polished marble floors. The air smelled of burning wood and something metallic, something faintly familiar but unsettling. The guests, men in finely tailored suits and women draped in gowns of deep reds, blacks, and golds, moved with eerie grace. Their laughter was soft, their smiles empty. They all seemed to know something she didn't. Then she saw him. At the head of the grand ballroom stood Lucien Delacroix, the patriarch of the family. He was ageless, his silver hair framing a face that was both striking and unsettling. His amber eyes gleamed like molten gold as he raised a crystal glass in her direction. "Ah, Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Welcome to the celebration. Tonight, you become one of us, or you don't leave at all." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. A chill ran down her spine. The doors behind her slammed shut. She had walked into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears as the heavy doors sealed shut behind her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the predatory glances of the elegantly dressed guests held her frozen in place. Lucien Delacroix descended the grand staircase with the grace of a king surveying his court, his golden eyes never leaving her. "You must be wondering why you were chosen," he said, stopping just a few feet away. His voice carried the weight of command, smooth, yet laced with something predatory. Evelyn swallowed. She forced herself to meet his gaze, though it felt like staring into the eyes of something ancient and inhuman. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't." Lucian smirked, as if pleased by her defiance. "Every year we choose someone from Black Hollow to partake in our festivities." A ripple of hushed laughter spread through the room, though it carried no warmth. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "And what exactly does this celebration involve?" Lucian stepped aside, gesturing toward the long, lavish banquet table behind him. "A test of wit, strength, and, most importantly, survival." At first glance, the table was set for a magnificent feast. Crystal goblets filled with deep red wine, silver platters piled high with succulent meats and exotic delicacies. But as Evelyn's gaze swept over it, she noticed something deeply unsettling. The meat, glistening under the candlelight, had an unnatural texture. The wine scent was too thick, too rich, too much like blood. And in the flickering glow she swore she saw a severed hand half buried beneath a pile of roasted fowl. Her stomach churned. A woman in a dark emerald dress, seated at the far end of the table, caught Evelyn's eye and gave her a knowing smirk. She lifted her goblet in a mock toast before taking a slow, deliberate sip, her tongue darting out to catch a stray crimson droplet. Evelyn's fingers trembled. This wasn't just some eccentric dinner party, it was a game, and she was the entertainment. The rules of the hunt. Lucian took his seat at the head of the table, motioning for Evelyn to come closer. "Join us, Miss Carter. It would be rude to refuse." Every fiber of her being screamed at her to refuse, to turn and run. But she forced herself to take slow, measured steps forward. The butler pulled out a chair beside Lucienne, and she had no choice but to sit. A woman with raven-black hair and piercing green eyes leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most don't make it past the first course." Evelyn turned to her sharply, but the woman only smirked and sipped her wine. Lucian tapped the side of his glass, silencing the murmuring guests. "Now, let us begin." A second butler entered the room, carrying a small black box in his gloved hands. He placed it before Lucian, bowing his head before stepping away. Lucian flicked open the lid, revealing 6 gleaming golden keys. 6 guests, 6 doors, 6 choices, he said smoothly. "Each of you will take a key. Behind the doors, a challenge awaits. If you succeed, you return to this table. If you fail—" He smiled. No one needed him to finish that sentence. Evelyn glanced around, realizing that she was not the only outsider here. 5 other guests, all looking equally uneasy, shifted in their seats. A man in his mid-30s with sharp blue eyes. A young woman barely past 20, her hands shaking. An older man with streaks of gray in his dark hair. Another woman, her face unreadable. And finally, the raven-haired woman who had whispered to Evelyn earlier, now watching her with unsettling amusement. Lucien held out the box. Choose wisely. One by one, the guests reached forward, plucking a golden key from the velvet interior. Evelyn hesitated before grabbing the one closest to her. It was cool to the touch, the metal unnervingly heavy in her palm. Lucien clapped his hands. Let the festivities begin. The room suddenly shifted, the candlelight flickering violently, casting grotesque shadows along the walls. A low hum vibrated through the floor, and the 6 outsiders were led toward an archway lined with towering black doors. Each door bore a different carved symbol. Evelyn's key was engraved with an eye, its pupil a swirling abyss. She swallowed hard. Lucien's voice drifted through the air as they each stepped toward their chosen door. Survive, Miss Carter. With trembling fingers, she inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing darkness beyond. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door shut behind Evelyn with a soft but final click, sealing her inside. She took a cautious step forward, her heartbeat a frantic drum against her ribs. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that pressed against her skin like an unseen force. She could feel something, watching. Then, suddenly, light. The torches along the walls flared to life, revealing a long, narrow chamber. Stone walls stretched endlessly, adorned with countless carved eyes. Some were wide open, others half-lidded, and some shut entirely. At the far end of the chamber stood a tall mirror, framed in gold and pulsing with an eerie glow. But it wasn't her own reflection staring back. It was a man, his face pale and expressionless, his eyes hollowed out sockets leaking something thick and black. Evelyn shuddered. Watch carefully, a voice whispered from the shadows. She spun around, but there was no one there. Her gaze flicked back to the mirror just in time to see the reflection move on its own. It raised a skeletal hand and pointed to the walls, where the carved eyes suddenly began to blink. The challenge had begun. The trial of sight. A deep rumbling filled the chamber as the walls began to shift, the carved eyes rotating in strange, unnatural patterns. Some flickered between open and shut, while others remained locked in place. Then, the whispering voice returned, now closer. Find the pattern. The wrong choice means death. Evelyn's pulse raced. She took a step forward, watching as the eyes on the wall continued to shift. At first, the movement seemed random, chaotic, but then she noticed something. Some eyes were opening and closing at precise intervals. Others remained shut. A pattern. She reached out to the nearest eye that remained open, pressing her fingers against it. The wall shuddered, and the eye glowed gold before freezing in place. A correct choice. Encouraged, she moved to the next, carefully pressing only the ones that blinked in the same pattern. 1, 2, 3. The walls groaned as the final eye snapped open, and a loud click echoed through the chamber. The mirror at the end of the room shattered, and the shadowy figure within let out a chilling, ear-piercing wail before vanishing into the darkness. Evelyn gasped for air, her hands trembling. Then, the far wall split open, revealing a staircase leading back up. She had passed the trial. Without hesitation, she ran forward, her legs unsteady beneath her. She didn't stop until she reached the grand ballroom once more, the warmth of the candlelight feeling almost surreal after the nightmare she had just endured. The survivor's return. As she stepped back into the ballroom, she realized she was not the first to return. The raven-haired woman, who had spoken to her before, stood near the table, her dress now torn and dusted with soot. She met Evelyn's gaze, tilting her head slightly. "You made it," she murmured. Evelyn swallowed. I guess so. The other survivors returned one by one. The older man, his suit stained with what looked like ink. The young woman, her hands still trembling. The blue-eyed man, his face pale but intact. Only one person was missing. The last guest, gone. Lucien, still seated at the head of the table, smiled. Well done. Most of you survived. His words sent a chill through the air. Evelyn's stomach twisted. There was no mourning for the one who didn't return, no acknowledgement of their fate, just acceptance. Lucien lifted his glass. Now, the second course begins. Evelyn's fingers clenched at her sides. This was far from over. The atmosphere in the ballroom had changed. The surviving guests, Evelyn, the raven-haired woman, the blue-eyed man, the older gentleman, and the trembling young woman, stood in silence, their bodies still humming with the lingering adrenaline of their trials. Lucien Delacroix remained at the head of the table, his golden eyes glimmering with undisguised amusement. He raised his glass, and the rest of the guests, his family, his people, followed suit, their movements eerily synchronized. To those who remain, he said smoothly. The Delacroix guests took a sip, their crimson wine gleaming under the chandelier's glow. Evelyn did not move. Her hands rested in her lap, her fingers twitching slightly. There was no mourning for the one who did not return, no acknowledgement of their fate, just acceptance. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. A butler stepped inside, carrying a silver tray covered by an ornate cloche. He moved in absolute silence, his footsteps making no sound against the marble. He reached the center of the table, then lifted the cover. Beneath it sat a single black velvet pouch. Lucien leaned forward. Now, for the second course. A deadly choice. The butler extended the velvet pouch toward the survivors. This round will be simple, Lucien continued. Inside this pouch are 5 stones, 4 are black. His lips curved. 1 is red. Evelyn's stomach twisted. The one who draws the red stone, Lucien said, will be the hunted. A ripple of unease spread among the survivors. The raven-haired woman smirked, but her green eyes sharpened. The blue-eyed man stiffened, his jaw clenched. The older gentleman exhaled slowly, his fingers twitching. The young woman's hands were shaking so violently she had to clutch them together. Evelyn stared at the pouch as the butler held it out. The silence was unbearable. Lucien tapped his fingers against the polished wood. Shall we begin? One by one they reached into the velvet pouch. The older man was first. He withdrew his hand and slowly opened his palm. A black stone. Next, the blue-eyed man. He pulled out his stone. Black. His shoulders sagged slightly in relief. The young woman went next. She hesitated for only a moment before retrieving hers. Black. That left only Evelyn and the raven-haired woman. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. The other woman smirked, then reached inside, drawing out her stone. She opened her palm. Black. Which meant Evelyn's fingers tightened around the remaining stone in her hand. Slowly, she turned her palm upward. The red stone gleamed in the candlelight. Lucien grinned. Ah, Miss Carter. It seems you have the honor of being tonight's entertainment. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She was the hunted. The hunt begins. The ballroom doors creaked open once more. Lucien rose from his seat, moving toward her with unsettling ease. You will be given a 2-minute head start, he said. During that time, you may run anywhere within the estate grounds. Evelyn's breathing quickened. Lucien continued, unbothered by her terror. At the end of those 2 minutes, my family and I will begin the hunt. The Delacroix family watched her with hungry eyes. Some smiled. Some simply waited. She was prey now. Lucien leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Run, Miss Carter." Evelyn bolted. She sprinted through the open doors, her heels clacking against the cold stone floor. Her dress snagged on something, but she didn't stop, didn't dare. She had 2 minutes, 2 minutes to find a way to survive. As she reached the manor's grand staircase, a clock somewhere in the house began to chime. 1 minute left. Evelyn hurled herself through a side corridor, darting past towering portraits of long-dead Delacroix ancestors. Their eyes seemed to follow her. Her lungs burned, but she couldn't stop. The estate grounds were vast. There had to be a place to hide, or better yet, a way to escape. 30 seconds. She turned a corner and nearly slammed into a figure. It was the raven-haired woman. For a split second, they stared at each other. Then, to Evelyn's shock, the woman grabbed her wrist and yanked her into the shadows. "What?" Evelyn started to protest, but the woman pressed a finger to her lips. "Shh," she whispered. "You want to survive? Then listen carefully." Evelyn's pulse thundered. She didn't know if she could trust her, but she had no other choice. A final chime rang through the halls. Then, from deep within the manor, a chorus of howls filled the night. The hunt had begun. The howls echoed through the estate, an eerie melody of hunger and anticipation. Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. Beside her, the raven-haired woman, her unexpected ally, kept a firm grip on Evelyn's wrist. "Stay quiet," she whispered. From somewhere in the corridors, footsteps scraped against the marble floors. Evelyn swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered back. The woman's green eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Because unlike them, I don't enjoy this game." Before Evelyn could ask what she meant, a low growl echoed through the hall. The hunt had begun, a predator's playground. Lucien Delacroix had many rules, but when it came to the hunt, there was only one: survive. The Delacroix family took their time. They wanted the game to last. From their hiding spot in the shadows, Evelyn and her ally watched as figures emerged from the ballroom, moving with inhuman grace. Some of them crawled on all fours, their fingers curling against the stone like talons. Others moved too fast, their bodies flickering in and out of the candlelight as they darted down different corridors. They weren't hunting with weapons. They were the weapons. Evelyn's blood ran cold. The woman beside her exhaled slowly. "We have to move. Now." Evelyn didn't argue. They slipped through a narrow passage, keeping low. The estate was a maze, with corridors twisting in unnatural ways. It felt like the walls were closing in, shifting when she wasn't looking. It wasn't just a house, it was a trap. The house that hungered. The air inside the estate grew heavier. Evelyn's legs ached, but she didn't dare stop. Every time she thought she had put enough distance between herself and the hunters, she would hear it. The slow, deliberate scraping of nails against wood. They were playing with her. "Where are we going?" she whispered as they slipped into a darkened library, the scent of old parchment and dust filling her nose. The raven-haired woman moved quickly, her hands skimming the shelves. "There's a way out, a hidden door." Evelyn's chest tightened. Why would they have a hidden door? The woman hesitated, then said, "Because even monsters need an escape." That answer did not make her feel better. She pressed her back against the bookshelf, trying to calm her breathing. Then, a sound, not footsteps, dripping. A slow, rhythmic drip. Drip, drip. Evelyn's stomach churned. She turned her head, and her breath caught. From the ceiling, dark liquid seeped through the cracks, pooling onto the floor. Not water, not rain, blood. The entire ceiling was bleeding. Evelyn bit back a scream as the slow drip became a steady flow, crimson streaks running down the walls like veins. The house was alive, and it was feeding. The raven-haired woman grabbed her arm. "Don't look at it. Help me find the door." Evelyn's fingers moved on instinct, searching the spines of the books. Her hands were slick with sweat. She didn't even know what she was looking for. Then, a click. A section of the bookshelf shifted, revealing a dark passage. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She stepped inside, the woman right behind her. The bookshelf slid shut, sealing them in darkness. And just as it did, something slammed against the other side, hard, a snarl of frustration, nails scraping against the wood. Then, silence. Evelyn exhaled, her hands shaking. They had seconds to spare. She turned to the woman. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated before saying, "My name is Celine, and if you want to live, you have to trust me." Evelyn wasn't sure she could trust anyone, but right now, she didn't have a choice. A revelation in the dark. The secret passage was tight and cold, the stone walls pressing in on them. Celine moved with certainty, leading the way through the narrow tunnel. Evelyn whispered, "How do you know about this?" Celine's footsteps didn't falter. "Because I grew up here." Evelyn stopped in her tracks. The air between them turned sharp. Celine glanced back, her green eyes unreadable in the dim light. "I was born a Delacroix." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Celine continued before she could react. "But I left this life behind, or at least, I tried." Evelyn's voice was hoarse. "Then why are you here?" Celine's gaze darkened. "Because Lucien doesn't let anyone leave." Silence stretched between them. Then, from behind them, a whisper. Low. Hungry. Too close. "You can't run forever." The passageway shook violently, and the walls began to close in. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. "Move!" They ran. The passage twisted and turned, the air growing colder with each step. The whispers followed them, slithering through the darkness like living things. Then, a light. At the end of the tunnel, a faint glow beckoned. Celine grabbed Evelyn's wrist and yanked her forward. They burst through the opening and found themselves in a catacomb. Hundreds of bone-white skulls lined the walls, empty sockets staring back at them. The air was thick with the scent of death and old magic. Evelyn turned in a slow circle, her stomach twisting. "We're not out," she whispered. Celine's face was grim. "No." Then from the shadows something moved. Lucien, waiting, smiling. "Did you really think escape would be that easy?" Evelyn's blood turned to ice. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. Lucien stood at the mouth of the catacombs, his golden eyes glinting with amusement. He didn't rush toward them. He didn't need to. Behind him, shadows slithered like living things, writhing along the stone walls of the ancient tunnel. Evelyn's breath came in short gasps. She gripped Celine's arm, resisting the urge to run blindly. She knew it wouldn't matter. Lucien wasn't just a hunter. He was the master of the hunt. Celine took a slow step forward, her fingers twitching at her sides. "Lucien," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You don't have to do this." Lucien laughed. "Oh, but I do." The sound slithered through the catacombs, sinking into Evelyn's skin like ice. "You know the rules, Celine," Lucien continued. "The hunted runs, the hunters pursue." He tilted his head slightly. "The game only ends when the blood is spilled." Celine stiffened. Evelyn glanced at her, realization dawning. Lucien hadn't just been talking about her. This wasn't just Evelyn's hunt. It was Celine's too. No more running. Evelyn took a slow step back, her fingers brushing against the cold stone of the catacomb walls. Bones rattled softly in the silence, centuries of forgotten dead pressing around them. She couldn't outrun Lucien. She had to outthink him. Evelyn turned to Celine. "Can we kill him?" Celine's gaze flickered to her, surprise crossing her features. Then a slow smirk tugged at her lips. Not easily, she admitted. But yes. Lucien sighed dramatically. Such a shame. I had high hopes for you, Celine. You could have been one of us. But instead, his golden eyes slid to Evelyn. You choose to die with the prey. Evelyn clenched her fists. I'm not prey. Lucian's smile widened. We'll see. And then, he moved. Faster than humanly possible, his figure blurred as he lunged forward. Evelyn barely had time to react before Celine shoved her aside and met Lucian head-on. The force of the collision sent shockwaves through the catacombs. Celine and Lucien clashed, their movements too fast for Evelyn to follow. Stone shattered. Skulls tumbled from the walls. The air crackled with old, dark power. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She needed a weapon. Her gaze darted to the floor, where a rusted dagger lay among the ancient bones. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing the blade, she turned, just in time to see Lucian slam Celine against the wall. Celine coughed, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Lucian pressed his hand against her throat. You've always been such a disappointment, he murmured. Evelyn moved. Before Lucian could react, she drove the dagger straight into his chest. The blade sank deep. Lucian froze. For a second, the catacombs were utterly silent. Then, he laughed. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Lucian's golden eyes flicked to her, amusement dancing in their depths. A valiant effort, Miss Carter. Then, he ripped the dagger from his chest like it was nothing. Evelyn stumbled back, her heart hammering. Lucien exhaled, shaking his head. Did you really think it would be that easy? Then, he lunged at her. But Celine moved first. She grabbed the dagger from his hand and with a sharp twist, plunged it directly into his throat. Lucien stiffened. Blood, thick, dark, unnatural, gushed from the wound. His golden eyes widened in shock. Celine leaned in close, her voice a whisper. You should have killed me when you had the chance. She twisted the blade. Lucian let out a choked sound. His body convulsed once, twice, before his legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around him. For the first time, Lucien Delacroix looked afraid. Then, his eyes slid shut, and the hunt ended. Freedom in the ashes. The moment Lucien died, the entire estate trembled. The shadows that had stalked the halls began to unravel. The torches flickered wildly, casting eerie shapes against the crumbling walls. Celine grabbed Evelyn's hand. We have to go. Now. Evelyn didn't argue. They ran, the catacombs shaking violently as the Delacroix family's magic began to collapse in on itself. By the time they reached the surface, the grand estate was burning. The fire devoured everything, flames licking hungrily at the once magnificent halls. Evelyn turned to Celine, her breath hitching. What about the others? Celine's expression darkened. If they're smart, they ran. They stood in silence, watching the Delacroix legacy turn to ash. Evelyn felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was over. She was alive. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight pressing against her chest lifted. Celine let out a slow breath. Then, she turned to Evelyn and smirked. You really aren't prey, are you? Evelyn met her gaze and, for the first time since the nightmare began, smiled. No, she said softly. Not anymore. Epilogue. A new beginning. The sun rose over Black Hollow, casting golden light over the smoldering ruins of the Delacroix estate. The town awoke to whispers of what had happened, but no one asked questions. No one ever did. By the time the last ember died, Evelyn and Celine were gone. No one knew where they went. Some said they left Black Hollow for good. Others claimed they vanished into the shadows. carrying the last remnants of the Delacroix name with them. But one thing was certain. The hunt was over, and Evelyn Carter, she was finally free. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, hit that like button and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And let me know on which topic you would like to see stories next. And check out these other stories you might enjoy. See you in the next one. Till then, take care and goodbye.